Former President Trump is now speaking outside a Manhattan courtroom before Stormy Daniels resumes her testimony in his criminal hush money case. Let's listen.
Mr. Trump, what do you think of Judge Cannon's order?
Are you happy with what's in her?
Thank you very much. What Biden is doing with respect to Israel is disgraceful. If any Jewish person voted for Joe Biden, they should be ashamed of themselves. He's totally abandoned Israel, and nobody can believe it. I guess he feels good about it because he did it as a political decision. You have to do the right decision, not the political decision, but he did a very bad thing. I just want to let you know that we've just filed a major motion in the appellate division concerning the absolutely unconstitutional gag order, where I'm essentially not allowed to talk to you about anything meaningful that's going on in the case, and many good things are going on with the case. It shouldn't have been filed. They had this morning the top legal scholars in the country. This is a Frankenstein case. They took a dead misdemeanor, they attached it to a dead alleged federal felony and zapped it back into life. So many of us are just amazed to watch this actually walk into court, because it's not a recognizable crime that any of us have seen. That's Jonathan Turley. I've been doing this for 60 years and I don't understand what crime he's been charged with. Nobody understands this. I just don't get the crime. There's no evidence of any crime whatsoever. This is a sham. That's Alan Dershowitz. And these are people that they speak their minds. They're not for me, they're for justice. This is another one. This is without precedent in American history, only with the desperation of President Joe Biden and his fanatic left-wing enforcers did it become possible to think about arresting and jailing their major political opponent. This case must be taken out of Judge Merchan's hands because he's totally conflicted. Judge Merchan is totally conflicted, like probably no judge has ever been conflicted before. Here's another one, Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg. His prosecution of former President Donald Trump violates both the federal and state constitutions. This is a prosecutor making it up as he goes along. Due process worthy of the names does not tolerate that. So these are statements. This is Andrew McCarthy made that statement, highly respected. Judge is allowing wide scope of information that has absolutely nothing to do with the case. That's Rebecca Rose Woodman, Fox News. Today we have Rick Scott here, Senator Rick Scott. We have other politicians here. We have people, many people in support. The outside of this building is closed down like Fort Knox. Nobody's ever seen. We have so many police down here, New York's finest, and they are New York's finest. They're just told what to do, but they don't have them at Columbia. They don't have them at NYU or any other places. This is like an armed camp down here, and you have nothing to worry about. Believe me, your problem is from the left, it's not from the right. Big problem from the left. It's from within our country. That's a bigger, in my opinion, a bigger danger than China or Russia. You have it from the outside and you have it from within. From within is a bigger danger to our country, and it's from the left, not from the right. But Rick Scott's here, and he said you can't go after political persecutions. This is a shame. This should not be happening in our country. And Senator Ted Cruz put out a very strong statement about attacking Donald Trump and the American voter. It's an attack on both. This is purely and simply election interference. There is no case. So that's the way it is, but here we sit after 2.5 weeks, and I think you'll see some very revealing things today, and I want to thank my lawyers. They've done a very good job, but I'd rather thank them after it's over as opposed to now, because we don't want them to get carried away. There's no case. Should have never been brought. Alvin Bragg didn't want to bring it. Cy Vance didn't want to bring it, and he didn't. He left. He didn't bring it. Everybody's looked at it. Southern District didn't bring it. Federal elections didn't bring it. It's also a federal case, not a state case, which they're not allowed to do, but these are minor details. So I just want to thank you for being here, and we'll see you later in the afternoon. Thank you very much.
What did you think of the Stormy Daniels testimony?
How does the lawyer feel about the testimony?
As former President Trump getting ready to head back in a Manhattan courtroom today, again blaming this trial on current President Biden without evidence. I want to bring in our executive editorial producer, John Santucci, for more. John, Trump covered a few different areas here. One, blaming the president, saying the president has abandoned Israel, urging Jewish supporters not to vote for them, saying they should be ashamed if they voted for him the first time. And then sort of shifting to the case. He talked about a motion to appeal the gag order against him, and then what we've heard before, that he thinks the case itself is unconstitutional.
Yeah, so let's start with that motion. So that motion was filed by Donald Trump's defense team yesterday. They filed it to the New York State Court of Appeals, trying to again get this limited gag order removed, because we know Donald Trump is really touching this line and this warning from Judge Juan Merchan that if you do it again, we're talking jail. Because recall, he has been hit so far with $10,000, Diane, in fines. There was group 1 of violations prosecutors cited. Donald Trump was hit with 9 out of 10 for that group. Group 2, leading up to the Republican presidential primary in Pennsylvania a couple weeks ago, comments Donald Trump made to that camera right outside court, and comments he made also to some affiliates, including our station WPVI. One of those comments he was hit for because it was about the jurors, which we all know, and Brian would be able to speak to this better than I could, that's the red line, right? You don't want to attack the jurors in any way, shape, and form, and they are obviously covered as part of this gag order. But look, we know, and look at those comments, right? The fact that he has to talk about Israel, he's talking about the protests in NYU. This is the only place Donald Trump can talk about the campaign trail, because he cannot go on the campaign trail. He made one very quick trip for the first time, actually, throughout all these proceedings midweek, back down to Florida. Why? Because he had to go do a fundraising event with donors and others that he was trying to actually get FaceTime with. That's a quick turnaround to have to jet down Tuesday night, come right back for court this morning. That is the problem right now, my sources tell me, for Donald Trump and his campaign. He's extremely limited, because with the fact being that you're in court Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Wednesday being the only off day, limited things on the weekend, it's really, really tough.
Brian, we hear former President Trump talking a lot about the gag order. He's called it unconstitutional many times. Now he says they filed this motion to appeal. How strong is that argument? The fact that, obviously, if a witness testifies against him, that story comes out in the press, and as a presidential candidate, does he have a right to respond to that?
So the way gag orders operate, and I think what he's pointed to, and a number of other attorneys have pointed this to me as well, is he's talking about a Nebraska Press Association v. Stewart Supreme Court case from 1976. In that case, it was specific to the news putting out very salacious and grotesque information about a murder. And there, they're protecting the rights of the defendant. Now, gag orders apply and can apply to anyone in a court proceeding, not just to protect the rights of the defendant, but to protect the rights of the proceedings as a whole. And what I think is happening here is Judge Merchan is arguing, or not arguing, he's supporting the arguments of the prosecution by saying that we have seen Donald Trump make comments in other court proceedings. Other court proceedings have issued gag orders, and those gag orders are applied because his words seem to carry more weight than other people, and they've seen that those words can cause either threats or harm or violence, and that's what the standard is. That's what he's applying. He's saying his words carry more weight and can cause a disruption to the proceedings. That would not be unconstitutional. Donald Trump is arguing that his words don't do that. Those are separate and apart from him, and that he should not be gagged because of other people's actions, in essence.
And I want to bring in our Aaron Katursky, who's outside the courtroom. Aaron, what can we expect today when Stormy Daniels takes this stand to be questioned by the defense?
She's going to be in a courtroom that is filled with various people who are Trump supporters, including conservative news hosts, Senator Rick Scott, no members of the Trump family that we can tell yet, but these are people that Trump has brought to court with him in order to perhaps support him through this testimony. Stormy Daniels is going to be cross-examined, I would imagine, on some of the inconsistencies in her story, what she was prepared to say in 2016 versus how she described the alleged encounter with Donald Trump in a Lake Tahoe hotel suite in 2006 on the witness stand the other day, where she talked about the imbalance of power that existed between them. It raised objections from the defense, who believed that she was trying to say that or suggest that this was anything other than consensual, which she had not said in the past. The prosecutor said these were the kind of details that Donald Trump paid to bury by having Michael Cohen wire her $130,000 in hush money.
And John, what are you hearing in terms of inside the courtroom? Who is there, and just sort of the color inside of the courtroom as these proceedings begin?
Yeah, it's interesting. Aaron just touched on this a little bit, that, we've obviously seen more members of the general public show up. We know from our team that there were some folks online at 12:30 this morning, Diane, trying to get a seat in the courtroom, obviously in part because they knew Stormy Daniels was on the stand and the excitement that was in that courtroom from Tuesday. It's interesting, and Aaron just mentioned that there's some conservative news host in there. It seems like Greg Kelly, one of the hosts of Newsmax TV, his father, obviously the former NYPD Commissioner Kelly, stood up, gave Donald Trump a thumbs up, Donald Trump pointing at him in recognition, and immediately court officers ordered the man to sit down. Because, when you walk into that courtroom, no one stands up for Donald Trump. This is not like when Donald Trump was commander-in-chief, that he'd walk into a room and everyone rose. In there, the only people they rise for are the judge or the jury.
Now, Brian, the jury's not in the courtroom yet to see, this exchange, but they will be when Stormy goes back on the stand. And on Tuesday, Trump was heard audibly cursing in the court. The judge had to ask his attorneys to tell him to stop. How careful does he have to be about his reactions?
Extremely careful. And I think Judge Merchan's point was that those audible cursing can either, one, affect the jury in terms of their belief of what Donald Trump is doing. It could be pro or negative, and you don't want that one way or the other. But also it could be an intimidation of the witness on the stand. And that's even more of an issue in any judge's mind. But again, it goes back to what Donald Trump can and cannot say, both in the courtroom and outside of the courtroom. And just to briefly go back to the gag order issue there, his argument, I think, is going to be that it's not narrowly tailored to what he can and cannot say, and that the issues of First Amendment that he keeps railing about, that this is too limiting as to what he can say. But he's, in many ways, proving the judge's point by having these audible cursing while Stormy Daniels is on the stand. He's not helping his legal arguments by what he's doing in court or outside of court.
And Aaron, consent was never an issue brought up here. This is considered a consensual, adult, sexual encounter that Stormy Daniels is saying she had with the former president. He, of course, denies that it ever happened. But there were parts of the testimony on Tuesday that almost sounded like a sexual assault case. Her describing the power imbalance between them, the fact that he was blocking the door. She didn't say that this was a non-consensual encounter, but how do you expect the defense to take on that sort of the insinuation that was in some of her testimony?
It's tricky, and it did feel, sitting in there on Tuesday, like you were listening to testimony that you might hear in some kind of a sexual assault case, and that is way far afield from what Donald Trump is charged with, and way far afield from how Stormy Daniels has described the alleged encounter before. When she spoke about it on 60 Minutes with Anderson Cooper, he said, so this was consensual? She goes, oh, yeah. And even the suggestion that it might not have been drew objections from the defense, but they have to be careful on cross-examination. If they go too far into it, it risks bringing the jury right back into those questions and right back into that hotel suite that Stormy Daniels described so vividly, down to the black and white tile floor, the gigantic flower arrangement in the foyer, the silk or satin pajamas she said Trump was wearing. All of those details, I'm sure the defense might like to challenge, but they also don't want to remind jurors of what Stormy Daniels said.
And Stormy Daniels is now back on the stand, we're hearing, but before the jury was brought in, the defense had asked if they could question Daniels about a past arrest, and the judge said no, that anybody can be arrested, and that does not prove a thing. Brian, what's your reaction to that? Yeah,
you're not allowed to do that. As a former public defender, prosecutors often ask about that of a client. There is no basis for an arrest. I mean, I've been stopped and frisked. I'm a 6'4" black man who has been in New York during stop and frisk. I've been stopped and detained. I've been questioned and then released because I matched the description of someone. What does that give you in terms of information as to my credibility, what I'm going to testify to? And if this is just an arrest, now I'm talking about a detention, I've never been arrested. If this is just an arrest and it didn't go anywhere, then the question still remains the same. What are you trying to prove through this arrest other than that she had handcuffs on her? Or no, that doesn't come in.
So, Brian, how do you expect the defense to cross-examine her today? What do you expect them to focus on?
I mean, Aaron touched on it quite well in the sense of, yeah, you're going to attack her credibility as to the events that occurred in that room. You're going to attack the fact that she doesn't know the inner workings of how payments were made, how money ended up in her account, distinguish the fact that this happened with Michael Cohen and others and not Donald Trump. But I think in going after this actual event, I think they run the risk of getting more information that is detrimental, and then they could potentially lose what I think is a very strong argument of saying that Stormy Daniels should have never testified about the salacious information, and that it tainted the jury in terms of propensity rather than actual giving light to what the prosecution was trying to inform the jury of. But if they open that door, an appellate court can say, you know what? You asked the question, now you got to deal with it.
And John, what are you hearing about how Trump is reacting now that Stormy Daniels is back?
So, according to our team, ABC's Olivia Rubin observed that Stormy Daniels walked in, a brief glance from Donald Trump looking at her, and then looking away. It does not appear that Stormy Daniels has looked at Donald Trump at all. And again, that pretty much jives what we saw from her behavior on Tuesday, and much of Donald Trump's for most of the day. Susan Neckles, one of Donald Trump's attorneys on this case, has just resumed cross-examination, and we know, Diane, from the way Tuesday ended, Neckles was very, very tough with Stormy Daniels. It was one member of our team described it as like a fierce tennis match. They were literally going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And Donald Trump, in part, based off the way he was reacting while prosecutors were under direct examination of Stormy Daniels, this is a little bit of playing to the audience of one. That Donald Trump very much wants his attorneys to attack and take out Stormy Daniels because, after all, he had to sit there and hear everything and was angered throughout the whole day.
So, Aaron, what are you watching for next?
Well, I'm interested to see how the defense approaches some of the inconsistencies in Stormy Daniels' testimony from Tuesday compared to how she described it before. I'm also interested in what the prosecutors are going to try and elicit on redirect. I don't expect that Stormy Daniels is going to be on the witness stand all day, but because she is so limited in her knowledge of the alleged crime. But the prosecutors did not dwell very much on the $130,000 hush payment. And I think that they may want to go a little more into it. How'd you get the money? What was your understanding? Was there a delay? We already know from prior testimony that Michael Cohen delayed and delayed and delayed, and the deal was on, the deal was off before it was on again. So all of these things are ripe for both the defense and prosecutors to continue to ask her before her time on the witness stand concludes.
All right, Aaron Kaczorski, John Santucci, Brian Buckmeyer, thank you all.